itself in spiritual moral excellence. And to put it simply, the fruit of goodness is demonstrated in our uprightness of heart and life. This leads us to have a disposition of God that is present within ourselves, that will lead us to do good and to begin to form the habit of choosing to do good things and to do good for others over the tempting effects of the world and sinful desires for the self. That is, we are inherently good, and we are remaining connected to the source of goodness, which is God. And so Paul prayed for the church in 2 Thessalonians 1:1. And he says, with this in mind, we constantly pray for you, that our God may make you worthy of his calling, and that by his power he may bring to fruition your every desire for goodness, and your every deed be prompted by faith. That is, to be filled with every good desire, to be successful in doing good for others as we are prompted by the Holy Spirit. In order for us to be able to demonstrate goodness and to be good to those around us, we must walk in the Holy Spirit. That is, we must walk in the source of all goodness, which is God. This means our hearts and lives need to be upright. They need to be walking in righteousness. And they need to be walking in truth. As Paul told us what the fruit of life was in Ephesians 5. And when we are walking upright, righteous, true, and honorable lives, we are a reflection of our obedience to him. For the commands of God are going to be present in our lives. And we are determined that the actions that we take are all based on being obedient to him. And so the fruit of goodness comes out in our actions toward others. How we act towards them. And every facet of our lives, and how we respond to those who we normally do not associate with on a regular basis. Those we find detestable. Those we want to avoid. Goodness dictates that we still act as God would have us act, regardless of their standing in society. So when we act in the fruit of goodness, we are acting in a manner which should be pleasing to God. Pleasing to God because our goodness flows from him. Goodness comes from being walking with the Holy Spirit. And this is why Paul tells us to be children of light. For in the light of our lives will be filled with the righteousness of God, the upright heart, and the upright life. We must seek to maintain our right standing before God. And when we do this, goodness will flow from us. And we will choose to do the good things that God has called us to do over our sinful desires. After all, we are called to live lives that are pleasing to God in 1 Corinthians 1:10, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit of every good work, growing in the knowledge of God. But we are also called to discern how we should act in the goodness of others. Not to act for the sake of doing something, but to cause no harm to anyone. And do all the good that we possibly can do for them. Not because it is a requirement to be good, but because the Holy Spirit prompts us to action in our lives and compels us to do good for the benefit of others. so that God's goodness may be seen in the land of the living. And those around us will see the Lord's goodness. We must devote ourselves to hearing the Holy Spirit prompt and work within our lives, and strive to do what is good, to demonstrate goodness to all those around us. As Paul writes to Titus in 3:14, he says, our people must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good in order to provide for urgent needs and not live unproductive lives. Anyone who can do good is able to do good, but goodness has to be within it. Goodness has to flow from God, because we are serving others for their benefit. And so when we think of doing good, we must always be asking ourselves and asking the Holy Spirit and God, am I doing this action because it will please myself, or is it going to please and glorify you? And so we must look carefully at how we act in goodness and carefully heed Paul's advice to us in Ephesians 5:15, which says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. He's saying, make sure you are doing goodness out of your own, not out of your own heart, but doing the goodness out of the love for God and for others. And so when the fruit of goodness is at work within our lives, we are choosing to do good all the time. That we are being prompted by the Holy Spirit as we walk with Him to action. And as we are being called to action and we are being convicted, then goodness will flow from our lives. As Paul says in Romans 15:14, my brothers and sisters, that you yourselves are full of goodness, filled with knowledge and competent to instruct one another. That our lives are to be filled with goodness. And when our lives are filled with goodness, because we are walking in obedience with God. We are connected to the source of all goodness. And so this leads us to perhaps the most profound thing about the fruit of goodness in our lives. Is that when you look at it and then you take in the fruit of patience and the fruit of kindness, you will see how the fruit of goodness, patience, and kindness are all connected.